parents kicked me out for supporting my pregnant sister and her BF. So I had to sleep in a tent and work 3 jobs to survive. I'm a 19-year-old guy who has always felt like the overlooked kid in my family. My older sister Rebecca, who's 21, has been the golden child since day one. Growing up, I watched her get showered with gifts, praise, and attention, while I was lucky to get a simple pat on the back for my achievements. It felt like my parents were constantly celebrating her every little accomplishment. Like that time she got a participation trophy in a school play. You would have thought she won an Oscar with the way they reacted. I remember one time I brought home straight A's on my report card feeling super proud. But when I showed it to my parents, they barely acknowledged it. They were too busy planning Rebecca's birthday party to even notice my hard work. It wasn't just grades. If Rebecca wanted something, she got it. New phone designer clothes, you name it. Meanwhile, I had to beg for new sneakers when mine were falling apart. It was clear to anyone that Rebecca was the favorite. When it came to education, I worked my tail off in high school and earned a scholarship to a solid university. This was a huge deal for me, especially since our family didn't have the funds for college. But when I told my parents, they barely reacted as if I had said I was going to a local community college. On the other hand, when Rebecca barely scraped by with C's and graduated, they threw her a massive party like she had just cured cancer. It was infuriating, but I learned to keep my mouth shut. Complaining never helped, so I focused on my future and getting out of that house. Then came my high school graduation dinner, which was supposed to be my moment. I had worked so hard and was ready to celebrate, but of course Rebecca had to make it about her. Right in the middle of dinner, she stood up and announced she was pregnant. Suddenly, all eyes shifted from my achievement to her news, and my parents were ecstatic as if she had just given them the best news ever. It didn't matter that she didn't have a job or that her boyfriend was a high school dropout with a questionable past. They treated him like he was some kind of hero. They even offered him a job in the family business without even asking what he could do. Here I was, set to start college on a scholarship, and they couldn't care less while Rebecca's situation seemed to hand her everything on a silver platter. A few weeks later, my parents sat me down and told me I needed to move out. They needed my room for the baby's nursery, and since Rebecca's boyfriend was moving in, there wasn't enough space. The kicker? They gave me 24 hours to pack my things and leave. I was stunned. They didn't care that I had nowhere to go, only that they needed to make room for their favorite child and her boyfriend. To add insult to injury, Rebecca demanded I give up my car too. Technically, it was in my parents' name, but I was the one who used it for school and work. She even suggested I drop out of college to get a job and support her and her boyfriend. I couldn't believe it. It was like they all expected me to just sacrifice everything I'd worked for, but there was no way in hell I was going to do that. So there I was, 19 years old, kicked out of my own home with just a backpack. I crashed with a friend for a few days, but I couldn't stay there forever. Eventually, I found myself living in a tent at a local campground. It was tough. I'd wake up every morning, go to class, and then head to one of my 3 part-time jobs just to keep afloat. It was exhausting, but I was determined not to let them win. I refused to give up on my education even when everything seemed stacked against me. Balancing 3 jobs and full-time studies was no joke. I barely had time to sleep, and when I did, it was usually in my car, which I managed to buy with some savings I had left. Most of it had been drained by my parents for Rebecca's needs. Every penny I earned went to gas, food, and basic survival. It wasn't an easy life, but it was mine, and I was proud of making it work despite the odds. Not long after I was kicked out, I learned my parents had drained even more savings to support Rebecca and her boyfriend, buying them a new car, covering baby expenses, and furnishing the nursery that used to be my bedroom. Meanwhile, I was struggling just to eat. But instead of letting it get to me, I used it as motivation. I threw myself into my studies and worked determined to prove that I didn't need them to succeed. I cut off all contact with my family. If they didn't care about me, then I didn't need them in my life. Honestly, I felt a lot better without their constant negativity dragging me down. My focus shifted entirely to my future, and I promised myself I wouldn't let anything or anyone stand in my way. I'm determined to not just survive, but thrive, and one day they'll regret how they treated me. Update 1. It's been a year since I got kicked out, and let me tell you, a lot has changed. After months of juggling 3 jobs and barely scraping by, I finally caught a break. I landed a stable job at a local tech company, which allowed me to cut back on my other gigs. With that job, I saved up enough to move out of the tent and into a small apartment. It wasn't fancy, but it was mine, and that meant everything to me. The best part? I kept excelling in school. I stayed on top of my studies and maintained my scholarship. There were nights when I felt overwhelmed and thought about giving up, but every time I remembered how my family had written me off, I pushed through. I knew that my education was my ticket out, and it was paying off. My professors started noticing my dedication, and one even recommended me for an internship at a well-known company. I couldn't believe it. Things were finally looking up. Meanwhile, back at home, things weren't going so well for my parents. They welcomed Rebecca's boyfriend into their home, but it quickly became clear that having a high school dropout with a shady past wasn't the best idea. He was lazy, rude, and didn't contribute much. Even though my parents gave him a job in the family business, he kept messing things up, and the business began to lose money. On top of that, Rebecca was struggling with the baby. Taking care of a newborn is no joke, especially without a stable income. The initial excitement of the baby wore off fast when the bills started piling up, and my parents, who had always been financially stable, suddenly felt the pinch. It was like watching a train wreck in slow motion. Honestly, I couldn't feel too bad for them. They had made their bed, and now they had to lie in it. Out of the blue, I got a text from Rebecca demanding that I come to her baby shower. She didn't just ask. She insisted, claiming it was my duty as her brother to be there. On top of that, she expected me to help financially since she and her boyfriend were struggling. She even wanted me to contribute to her dream wedding plans, even though they weren't married yet. I almost laughed at her audacity. Then my parents chimed in, saying I owed them for raising me, and that it was time I stepped up to help the family. They seemed to forget that they kicked me out a year ago with nothing. I wasn't about to roll over and get sucked back into their drama. I told them no, and set a strict no-contact boundary. Standing up for myself felt empowering. I was done being their punching bag. After cutting off contact with my family, I threw myself into my internship. This was a huge opportunity, and I worked hard, learned a ton, and began building solid connections. It felt like a game changer. I was finally on the right path, and my struggles were starting to pay off. Beyond my professional life, I focused on building healthier relationships. I made new friends, reconnected with some old ones, and even started dating again. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I had a support system outside of my toxic family. I realized I didn't need them to be happy or successful. My life was my own, and I was finally taking control of it. Update 2. Fast forward 3 years, and I'm proud to say that life has turned out pretty great. I finished my degree, and thanks to that internship, I landed a dream job right after graduation. The pay was solid, and for the first time ever, I felt financially stable. I upgraded to a nicer apartment, started saving for the future, and even treated myself to a few things I'd always wanted but could never afford. It was a massive turnaround from where I was just a few years ago. On top of that, I was genuinely happy. I had a great job, a solid group of friends, and even a relationship with someone who truly valued and respected me. Looking back, it's wild to think about how much has changed. I went from living in a tent and working 3 jobs to living comfortably and building a career I was proud of, all on my own without any help from my so-called family. While I was thriving, my family was not. From what I heard through mutual contacts, things had spiraled downhill for them. My parents had drained their retirement funds trying to support Rebecca and her boyfriend, who, surprise, surprise, still wasn't contributing. The family business was failing due to his incompetence, and they were on the brink of bankruptcy. The real kicker? Rebecca's boyfriend had been cheating on her, with her best friend, no less. When that came to light, it was a disaster. Rebecca was devastated, and my parents were furious, but it was too late to undo the damage. He took off, leaving Rebecca to deal with the fallout. Now she was a single mother struggling to keep it all together while my parents were drowning in debt with no way out. Just when I thought I was done with their drama, my family pulled one last stunt. One day, out of nowhere, they showed up at my workplace. I hadn't seen them in years, and to say I was shocked would be an understatement. I'm not sure shocked captures it fully. When they walked in, it felt like they were acting as if nothing had happened, completely ignoring that we hadn't spoken in 3 years. They started with all this sentimental talk about how much they missed me and how we should just forget the past. But I wasn't buying it. I knew it was all a facade. After some awkward small talk, they got to the point. They were broke and struggling, and they wanted me to help them out financially. They even asked if they could move in with me until they got back on their feet. I couldn't believe their nerve. Here they were rambling about how families should stick together, and I was just standing there stunned. After everything they'd put me through, they really thought they could just waltz back into my life and start making demands. I let them finish their spiel before I calmly told them that I wouldn't help. I reminded them of how they had kicked me out and left me to fend for myself, and I had managed just fine without them. I made it clear I wasn't interested in reconnecting or pretending to be a happy family. They tried to guilt-trip me, saying things like, "But we're your family and you owe us for everything we've done for you." I shot back that they made their choice years ago when they chose Rebecca over me, and now they had to deal with the consequences. I wished them luck, but I firmly told them to leave and not to contact me again. It was harsh, but it needed to be said. As they walked out, I felt a wave of relief. I was done with them for good this time. Update 3. I thought refusing to help would be the end of it, but I was wrong. Instead of accepting my decision, they retaliated in a big way. It started with them trash-talking me to anyone who would listen. Suddenly, social media was flooded with posts from my parents, and Rebecca painting me as the selfish, ungrateful child who abandoned my family in their time of need. They twisted the narrative conveniently, leaving out the part where they kicked me out at 19 to make room for Rebecca's boyfriend. At first I tried to ignore it, but the posts kept coming. Nastier and more personal. They even dragged my friends into it, tagging them and spreading lies. It was ridiculous, but what really crossed the line was when they began harassing me at work. My parents would call my office repeatedly, leaving messages with my coworkers about a supposed family emergency. Rebecca even showed up one day, causing a scene in the lobby and demanding to see me. It was humiliating, and it was clear they were trying to ruin my reputation. I knew I had to act before things got even worse. After reading advice on Reddit about taking legal action, I finally decided to pursue a restraining order against them. Honestly, I should have done this earlier, but part of me hesitated because they were my family. However, their recent behavior made it clear I needed to protect myself, even if it meant taking legal steps. Before filing, I gathered evidence. Screenshots of their social media posts, records of their calls, and even security footage from work showing Rebecca causing a scene. I also decided to share my side of the story online, detailing why I cut ties with them, complete with proof to back up my claims. The response was overwhelmingly supportive, and their smear campaign quickly backfired. They were exposed for being toxic and manipulative. The restraining order was granted, legally barring them from contacting me or showing up at my workplace again. It was a huge relief. For the first time, I felt like I could breathe without constantly looking over my shoulder. Despite the restraining order, they didn't stop trying to worm their way back into my life. My parents faced legal consequences for their harassment, and with their financial situation worsening and their business on the brink of collapse, they were desperate. No one wanted to help them after the truth came out and their reputation was in tatters. Rebecca, on the other hand, had to face the reality of her situation. Without her boyfriend and with her social circle shrinking, she found herself completely alone. The entitlement that once worked in her favor only pushed people away, and even her so-called friends began to see through her act. She tried reaching out to me one last time, but I didn't respond. I had nothing left to say to her. Update 4. 5 years have passed since I last had any contact with my family. During that time, I've built a life I'm proud of. A secure job, a home I love, and supportive, healthy relationships. But life hasn't been kind to my parents and Rebecca. Their lives have completely unraveled. My parents' business eventually collapsed, and without savings or income, they lost their house. Now they've been bouncing between relatives' couches, but even that goodwill has worn thin. Most of the family has cut them off, tired of the constant drama and financial begging. It's a far cry from the comfortable life they once had. As for Rebecca, she's now raising her child as a single mother. She never managed to hold down a stable job, and without my parents' financial support, she's barely scraping by. The boyfriend she thought would provide an easy life is long gone, and she's had to face the harsh reality of her situation. The harsh truth is that her entitlement doesn't pay the bills. The friends who once adored her have distanced themselves, worn out by her constant demands and drama. Now she's isolated, struggling, and, from what I hear, deeply unhappy. A few months ago, out of the blue, I received a call from an aunt I hadn't spoken to in years. She informed me that my parents were in dire straits and had asked her to reach out on their behalf. They were desperate for help and, according to her, willing to do anything to make things right. My aunt urged me to meet with them, claiming they were genuinely sorry for everything that had happened. I agreed, mostly out of curiosity. When I saw them, I was shocked by how much they had aged. They looked defeated, nothing like the confident, controlling people I once knew. They begged for my help, saying they had nowhere else to turn. They even tried to guilt-trip me about family loyalty, but I felt no sympathy. They had their chance to be a family to me, and they blew it. I told them outright that I wouldn't help. I reminded them how they had kicked me out without a second thought, drained my savings, and tried to ruin my life. I refused to bail them out just because they were finally facing the consequences of their actions. I walked out feeling confident I had made the right choice. In the years that followed, I heard updates about my family from mutual acquaintances. My parents declared bankruptcy and lost what little they had left. Rebecca struggled, bouncing from job to job, unable to find stability. It was ironic. They had spent years elevating Becca while treating me like I didn't matter, only for her to end up in such a bad place while I thrived. Some might call it karma. I'm not sure I believe in that, but it's hard not to see it that way. They made their choices, and now they're paying the price. As for me, I'm at peace. I've built a life that far exceeds anything I could have imagined when I was living in that tent. I'm successful, happy, and surrounded by people who genuinely care about me. I've learned that you don't need toxic family members to succeed. You just need the determination to rise above your circumstances. Looking back, I can't say I regret how things turned out. It was tough, but it shaped me into who I am today. I've learned to value myself and surround myself with those who lift me up rather than tear me down. Family isn't always about blood. It's about who stands by you when times are tough. I have no plans to reconnect with my parents or Rebecca. They made their choices and I've made mine. I'm focused on my future, my career, and the people who have supported me through it all. I've moved on and I'm not looking back. The past is behind me and my life is moving forward.